Can someone just confirm that you can? Thank you.
Yeah, fine.
So this is what this sort of thing. So for those who are not aware, I'm Andrew Gilruth. We've not met before. I'm the Chief Executive of the Moorland Association, and I'm now going to run through and update you on how we navigate our way through the new rules which DEFRA has actually announced. In terms of the agenda we're running through, just do a brief introduction. We need to have a brief visit through the previous regulations because they provide some context for, if you like, the new ones that have been announced for 2025. Then we'll go through the 2025 regulations as DEFRA have outlined them so far and the limited amount of information that we do have. Then we'll talk about how they will actually be applied and the various reasons that can be used and the consenting and the information that will be required for the consent and the types of timelines. And then at the end, talk through the next steps, if you like, about what the Moorland Association itself is actually doing, and then take any questions. If you have any questions as we go along, please just speak up because I can only see a handful of people on my screen, or perhaps put something in the chat. And maybe Rob Beeson might be able to alert me to any immediate questions. Obviously, if there are subsequent questions you want to follow up with, by all means, just send those through to Bernie Parr, and we will follow those up with you individually. So we'll just remind ourselves of where we are. DEFRA had its consultation, which lasted for the 8 weeks, which ran from the end of March to the end of May. That was announced without any form of prior warning to the rural community. And then we heard absolutely nothing until DEFRA announced its response last Tuesday on the 9th of September. It provided a brief summary of the feedback from that consultation, and I salute all the MA members that got involved because DEFRA recognised those concerns that were put forward by MA members and make explicit reference to that. They talked about the concerns raised in relation to wildfire risk and various other legal and ecological points that were raised consistently. However, also simultaneously on the same day, DEFRA announced that the Secretary of State had used his powers under the Hill Farming Act 1946 to lay a statutory instrument down in Parliament, which means that that basically is the new regulations which we'll be talking about, and that those will be effective from the 30th of September. In response to that, the MA is doing 2 core strands of work. One is taking legal advice in terms of whether what has happened is fit and proper under law. I'm not able to really comment on that right now because we have appointed solicitors and a KC to report on that, and we have a conference on Friday to review that situation. So I could only speculate now in terms of thoughts and ideas on that. We need to wait for them to come back. But in parallel with that, we're also working up in terms of practical advice, which is what we're talking about now, what we're doing. And that practical advice would be happening now for everybody on the 30 and 40 centimetres. But obviously, if they hadn't introduced the 30 centimetres, we would still be doing this exercise with those that are attempting to seek licenses to burn over 40 centimetres. So we're pushing on with that regardless. So it'd be worth recapping where we were. So in 2007 is the beginning of the regulations. You'll be familiar with these points, but it's worth reminding ourselves that these are being layered up. So this specified the burning season and it introduced the concept about the slope and the size of a single burn, and then also about the exposure of bare soils, the size of those, and the distance they could ever be along the banks of a watercourse, and whether the soil can be left smouldering for more than 48 hours. Those are things that you're familiar with from 2007. The key point within all of that, you'll start seeing this recurring from 2007 onwards, is necessary and expedient for the conservation, enhancement or management of the natural environment or the safety of any person. So you'll find that as a bit of a theme going through. So that you'll be familiar with that. That's what was the regulation from 2007. Moving forwards to the 2021 regulations, this is the bit which you'll remember. This relates to the areas which have got more than 40 centimetres of heat and are also designated sites, and those should either be the triple SIs and either an SAC or an SPA. So those that are familiar with that are currently in that bracket will familiar with this. The application process is, according to DEFRA, is an 8 to 12 week process. So that's a 3-month process with DEFRA, but it also requires a consent from Natural England, and that can take up to 4 months. So you've got the 7-month block already in play, and we might come back to that because it's likely that the same sorts of processes we're going to start seeing in the new regulations, though those haven't been confirmed by DEFRA, and we'll come back to that in a moment. The key point about the 2021 regs is there were 4 bases to be able to introduce those regulations. The first was basically for conservation. The second was for safety. There was a third one to do with wildfire risk, and the fourth was inaccessibility to mechanical cutting. You'll note there's no, in the 2021 regs, there was no scope in there to be able to do research, and that has proved problematic as well. So looking forward, going on about the impact of those regulations, and that's mindful of what members commented in their submissions to DEFRA. There was a 73% reduction in the areas managed by burning or cutting. And also that lack of applications has been used by DEFRA, and most recently in February by Mary Cray, that the lack of applications indicate that there isn't really an issue here, because there is a licensable route, and if there haven't been applications, then that means there isn't really a problem. This is a neat bureaucratic trick for making things go away. You license something and make it so complicated that nobody bothers, and hey presto, your problem has gone. So that is one of the reasons why the MA board, in particular for the 40 centimetre, those in the 40 centimetre category, to make sure that the MA was effectively supporting those. So we put that in place. Now looking at current year, so 2025 regulations, DEFRA have used, as per their consultation response, areas that have a depth of peat that is greater than 30 centimetres that also fall within a designated, less favourable area. So it must have been designated as a less favourable area. Sorry, George, you've raised a hand. No. You might have
just
a microphone.
On that previous slide, it says that it's been, as a result, there's been a 73% reduction in burning or cutting. Why would there be a reduction in cutting because of the impact of the 2021 regs?
I don't say no. You're quite right, George. That was a number. It was an RSPB funded research report, and that was the statistic that came out of it. That's the only statistic we've got on the scale of the impact of the 2021. It didn't just say burning; it said burning or cutting. So it was the combination of the two. That was the only reason I mentioned it in there. You're right; it doesn't have a direct impact, but it does make you start wondering about the areas that are actually being managed and how much management will happen as a result if people think it's just not worth the effort.
Indeed. Okay, thank you.
So it is the combination of the two. That is exactly as per the consultation that DEFRA announced at the beginning of the year. DEFRA clarified that in relation to those with existing agreements to burn over 40 centimetres or more, the rules will not be applied retrospectively. So those consents will continue until they expire. They say that DEFRA say that the England Natural England staff are aware of this. However, if you have existing agri-environment schemes, you may well need to obtain, and you get at one of the new 30 centimetre licenses, you may need to seek an adjustment through the Rural Payment Agency to that agreement. We haven't got details about exactly how complicated that will be or not. And the next point is about clarification. There are a couple of exemptions, and these relate to the size of the area, and if it is on steeper than 35 degrees, or you'll be familiar with this one, more than 50% of the area to be burned is covered by exposed rock or scree. So it's a slight variation on the previous rules. So talking about checking for depth, this is the same as before, and DEFRA are using the same metric that has been used consistently elsewhere. So for every quarter of a hectare, you should take a photograph of the equipment you're using, and that is because there is no defined tool to use to be able to measure peat depth. You're free to use whichever tool you like, but you should have a record of it. And then, as before, the position of the 4 outer corner points and one in the center, and those should be recorded. So those are sort of, if you like, as before, and that those should be recorded at each of those 5 points. And obviously it gets scaled up if you've got a larger area than that. Now, they are saying that if any of the places you're planning to burn is deeper than 30 centimetres, then you would need to apply for a licence, and that's to burn the heather or other type of vegetation. In terms of checking the less favourable area, there is actually if you're at large scale, there is actually DEFRA have issued a map. They've also explained how to access it via the DEFRA Magic Map, and the MA has put on that link there, has put onto the website the explanation as to how to access that to double check if anyone's on a fringe of a less favourable area. So they are aware of it. Okay, everything I'm going to be running through now is about how to apply, and that is based, Rob Beeson has pulled together an MA handbook, which is on the MA website. Edmund, you've raised your hand.
Yeah, hi Andrew. Hi, Edmund Glaister from Hurst and Tootle in the Peak District. 2 questions. One about licenses already granted, which we have a license, but we haven't been able to act upon it because I think you're aware of this, Andrew, the management plan hasn't been approved by Natural England.
Yeah.
Does that mean we'll be able to keep on pursuing that? And if we get some sort of management plan, we should be able to still burn on 35 centimetre peat?
Edmund, that's a sensible question. I think we'd have to double check with DEFRA, but if I've understood their interpretation correctly, that is an issued license. All that is required for you to execute it at Hurst and Tootle is satisfy one of the conditions. So that license still stands. It hasn't expired. It's a question of satisfying condition 6 in relation to the we'll come on to it, but the management plan, isn't it, as I understand it?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Just a second question, might seem very naive, but yeah, let's call me naive. What is a less favourable area? How's
Okay.
that? What is it?
Well, there'll be probably others on this call that are better able to explain it, but this was originally an area which actually to be able to provide increased support payments to farmers in disadvantaged areas, which just happens to coincide. This is not a conservation related designation. It is just simply a sweep of the map, looking at places, and it does extend down to chunks of Exmoor, Dartmoor, and the Isles of Scilly too. So this is places where it is difficult to make. But does someone else want to comment on that? I can't see anyone else, but do comment. Right. Are there any other immediate questions on the points that we've raised?
Results from, it was on the 7th of January this year.
I think that's on with the Michael. So looking at the MA handbook, this is a live handbook on the MA website. Rob Beeson's keeping updated, so as new information comes in, that Bible will be expanded. If we've got relevant questions, those will be posted in there too, and the respective answers. So we're trying to keep that as a definitive go-to guide, which has been translated from civil servant speak into a more practical tool. So just touching on the key points that within that, which may open up some further discussion. The reasons to burn, there are now the 4. The first one being the one you're familiar with in terms of conservation, then reducing the impact of wildfire, and I will go back and we'll be covering off those 2 in particular in some detail. The third relates to safety, and that's safety outside wildfire safety. And then the 4th one is research or education. You will see the reason to burn, they have now excluded that you can't use mechanical, you can't access it or use mechanical cutters. So that has been removed as a reason. So there's those 4. So whichever one of those you were to use, there are various pieces of information which you would expect DEFRA to request. Obviously, some detail about the landowner must be in agreement. And if a piece of land is already in an agri-environment scheme, then the confirmation that in terms of that adjustment, that must have agreed before the consent, before the request for the license goes in. And you must have consent from Natural England, if it is a triple SI, to burn at that location. And if it is common grazing land, you must also have the right and permission to burn. So it goes back to the point at the beginning. You can't burn effectively on someone else's land. So all of that would probably make sense to everyone on this call. If we look at the conservation license in particular, then we start going into some of the detail. The map and the boundary what they consider will be the entire land holding, so not just the burn area. Require a detailed assessment of the current peat condition. We've yet to have clarification about what is meant by detailed. Information about how you've already addressed other issues relevant to the restoration of the habitat. You'd expect to see that. And then we get on to later on the justification for why burning is necessary in order to support that conservation activity. DEFRA has said that it will provide templates by the 30th of September for us to be able to populate, but we haven't even seen a draft of that yet. But that is the evidence that will need to be required before submitting. There are other details which need to be in there, but they're fair. They're, I suppose, things that you'd almost expect to see in there. But remember, a clear and compelling justification. We're going to have to work together on this, because Natural England is of the view that heather burning is a damaging operation. So we need to be able to present a strong and clear argument, because DEFRA appear to have accepted that view at the moment. Looking at the for the wildfire license, and this goes back to the discussion we've just been having about Hurst and Tunel. Again, this is the whole land holding, includes the explanation, as you'd expect, other actions, and they have recognised and started including more detail in terms of high risk ignition points. So those that have got well-used car parks, or on well-used footpaths or routes, that, or places which are used overnight, then that would be one of the factors in there. The bit at the end is the bit that we were discussing previously at Hurst and Tunel, where they do have a license under the 2021 regulations from DEFRA. So this is a license signed and approved by the minister, but you also now need to have as a condition a management strategy outlining how you intend to manage the site to improve the landscape resilience, and this is, I put this in bold, and reduce the need for burning in the future. Now, we have got to have some quite lengthy discussions with DEFRA about that, because there's a presumption there that that is possible, and undoubtedly there will be sites and moors where that is possible, but equally it stands to reason there may well be sites where that is not possible, or not possible in the short term. So we look forward to hearing more from DEFRA on that. Now, the application process itself, you can only make an application by using DEFRA's online form, and it says that that will be available from the 30th of September. And the timeline, their processing timeline, is 12 weeks. But bear in mind, if you've got to get consent from Natural England, then you may as well add another 4 months to that too. And the duration they put in is typically 1 year. That mimics the 2021 regs. You can request a license for longer than 1 year, but you need to explain why you're requesting a license of a longer duration than one year. Lastly, on amendments, if you want to amend, and if you are successful and you have a license and you seek to make amendments, you will need to submit a new application. And then if that is successful, then the existing one is then revoked. So moving on to where we are and if you like, next steps. The MA has a meeting with DEFRA on Thursday next week. So if people have questions, or more detailed and complex questions, please do send them in to us. You can either raise them now or email them into Bernie. So that's information that we can use and explore with them in the meeting. As you can imagine, we will be updating the MA handbook that I talked about online. So the moment any more information keeps coming in, we will keep updating that. We're also supporting members to actually make applications, and the first trial group of members we're piloting will actually be in the Peak District next week. So the first few estates. We are trying to work out how long it takes to actually prepare these applications and get them in. So this will be under the previous rules, but we will do our best to see how long it really takes. It will give us raw information. We can keep going back to DEFRA, explaining, can they articulate what would a competent application look like in this situation? And the more questions we ask, probably the quicker we'll be able to get to the bottom of whether or not the system is actually workable. We're anticipating that the majority, if not all of our applications, will receive a negative determination. But at the same time, we do wish to be able to get the volume of applications up to be able to make it clear to the Minister that the system is not fit for purpose if we can't actually get the product out at the end in a timely manner. And then, as you'd expect, we're continuing to do the best all we can to raise awareness in the press and with MPs, and members have been very proactive about engaging with the local MPs through the summer on various issues, and they understand the seriousness of the situation which those on this call have been put in by DEFRA. So we have the opportunity. The earliest we can meet DEFRA is next Thursday, because the senior staff which are involved in this are not available because they've gone on holiday. It doesn't exactly fill me with joy, but you'd have thought if they decided they were introducing something on the 30th of September, that perhaps they might have had people available to be able to add and make things clear. I'm just going to stop sharing so that I can see some faces. That's better. There's still some people there. I'm happy to put the screen back up if there are particular pages that people want to refer or go back to. But I'd be keen to hear any thoughts or questions from the floor, as it were. Mike, you asked a question about it just relates to burning. That is correct. It only relates to burning. So everything I've been talking about is based on the statutory instrument that was laid before Parliament on the 9th of September, and it is only in reference to burning. And Mike, you also asked about the other methods. I think that the other methods elements they've kept that wide and open deliberately, probably because you could argue that it wouldn't want to define it, because as soon as they've defined it, that would mean that you couldn't use something else and or another tool. So it could be anything, I suppose, from grazing all the way through to cutting and or their re-wetting, but quite how you're going to add any more to the re-wetting, I'm not sure, above and beyond the 7,000 kilometers we've already blocked up. So it'd be interesting to hear, and those that have got a particularly dry ground, then no doubt you'll be expected to put in some irrigation equipment. Sorry, someone's got their hand up. It says Claire. I'm sure it's not.
Sorry, it's me, Andrew.
Oh, sorry.
It's Dan. Effectively, you're going to have a restoration plan that will be fit for an HLS agreement, aren't you? In order to qualify. And, an HLS agreement, as we know, deliberately is set out to reduce burning.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're sort of drifting back. We probably need to get to the bottom of that, and then we can then segue into, is that proportionate and reasonable from a legal perspective? And we can also ask whether that is reasonable or proportionate in the court of public opinion, because there's two separate elements to all of this. And any legal challenge if it's to be successful, would also have to win out the public argument as well. Otherwise, it's not a very helpful victory, because you might have won in court, but the whole thing comes trundling back down the track again in 6 months or a year later. So we have to push out as much as we can, but we don't have that clarity. And I think the more applications we get in, the clearer that's going to become. And the only way to achieve this is to keep trying, and to point out that is the level of detail they're asking for. They may be able to ask for it in law, but is it practical? Is it realistic? And the answer is it probably isn't, Dan. So, let's take a mall may well end up having to commission someone to produce an external document for a 1-year license. When the costs start ratcheting up, then that probably isn't really going to happen after a while. So is that realistic? And is this actually just a process, as you say, Dan, to try and prevent what would otherwise be a lawful activity? So the level of detail that is required for what is in effect a relatively low risk activity is mind-numbingly, absolutely mind-numbing. So we've got to, we should be able to keep asking those questions. But certainly about the duration of the licenses. I mean, who's going to go to a huge amount of effort to produce a license which you can only use for a year? And in the case of Hurst and Tunel, as they effectively demonstrated, still being able to satisfy the conditions of the license can also be a challenge. So even if you've got one, being able to comply with it may not be that easy. So Kate Russell's guidance on this and what we're going to try and do is using both legal minds and scientific minds. I actually keep going back to DEFRA saying we feel that the information that we have provided provides you with enough information to make a positive determination, though it may not be the level of information which you initially said that you wanted. So, and just to keep pointing that out, and we may have to index this against applications to be able to do other activity, either with Natural England or in society. The fact that it takes you so long to get a license relative to so many other licenses, which are potentially more adverse risk, is astonishing. So, Mike, you asked what's the cost approximate of this? To be honest, we haven't got that far yet, and I think we may have to run some pilots and help fund that to actually get to the bottom of this, to establish how much this will really cost. But if we can start, we should not end up our end point, which we need, is that a reasonably competent estate team and head keeper should be able to populate a license application and submit it and get a positive determination. There's no reason why it has to be so complicated, and we will have to test that. The question in relation to the basis for knowledge sharing, yes. So the aspiration, Jen Bruin is busy working up what, if you like, the data bank on the scientific literature, so that for responding to different questions and different types of issues, what evidence already exists that should be referenced in support of that. And we also need to have a knowledge bank in terms of key paragraphs that people can use from a legal perspective too. So a clarification about the basis within that application. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to help give DEFRA the information which will enable them to make a positive determination. But sorry, George, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, just say, I mean, I suspect that many people will is reaction to this, response to this, particularly those on the North York Moors who have virtually no 40-centimetre deep peat, but are now faced with quite significant areas of 30-centimetre deep peat. It will be to simply gear up and do more cutting on said area. They don't need any additional consents to do that. If they've got permission to burn at the moment, they should probably almost certainly say burn or cut in whatever agreement or consent they've got, and they'll gear up to do that. And the impact of that is there's obviously individuals, moors can measure the cost implication to them of doing that, and compare that with what they might have spent on burning. But there's going to be an environmental impact, I would sense, as well, of doing that. On all sorts of levels, the landscape's going to look a bit different. It's going to have a lot more straight lines in it and a lot less sort of natural fire feathered edges. It's going to have an impact on archaeology, heavy machinery going over the top, most of which is unrecorded or unknown about, so it's quite difficult to measure what it is. There's going to be an impact on, occasionally there's going to be areas that get scalped or whatever, uneven areas, going to be hummocks of moss, whatever, that get knocked out. What is the plan to try and measure the impact of that? Because ultimately, if this thing is going to be repealed, is that not going to be the basis upon which another government might need that information in order to justify repealing or amending this diktat?
So this is the statutory instrument can be updated and I suppose and changed at a drop of a hat. So we would need to be able to do our best to be able to record that. The key bit on the legality of the entire process is that the legal challenge needs to have been brought promptly and no later than 3 months after it was introduced. And so that clock started ticking last Tuesday. So, for example, it is not possible to go back. There's no obvious legal way, for example, to go back and review the 2021 regs because they're now in place. So to challenge those that would needed to have been done at the time, and no doubt thought was given to that. So likewise, we're looking at it here. I think that this time round, it's probably a little bit different. This time round, there is a reasonable degree of evidence that the DEFRA had a fettered mind, which in law means it had a closed mind. It had already decided what outcome it wanted, and actually didn't really matter what anybody said. It was still going to implement exactly what it wanted to do. If a judge was to agree with that, that would mean that what has just happened is illegal and the statutory instrument would have to be removed. And at best, the whole process would have to start again in terms of a proper review. So that would be one strand. And there is legal precedent for this in terms of government departments going into engaging and actually having a closed mind and being turned over. The second broad area is about the reasonableness of introducing a system which you've automatically introduced a 3-month ban on a piece of activity which has been going on for quite a long time. And there's no real reason or urgency to have to introduce it into, for example, this burning season. So I think the weight of evidence at the moment, I mean, I'm not a KC, but the weight of evidence, I think, is probably on our side. There doesn't seem to be any reason. It's not as if, it's not like the sudden suspension of the general license, the original general license. That had to be suspended because it was deemed that DEFRA had taken advice that said that it was unlawful, so it immediately had to be unstitched. But that's not going on here. This is a timeline which DEFRA has decided to impose. There's no need for it to be done now, and indeed there's precedent from Scotland where the initial time frame for implementation, where it was then extended because they realised that they just couldn't get it right. And I suspect we probably might be in a similar place come the 30th of September, because in Scotland they couldn't get the website to work. There was confusion about how to get the maps in it, what maps should be in it, and so it went on. And in the end, they had to concede that it wasn't really going to be particularly helpful, and that still feeds into the wider public domain discussion, because the Scottish government has recognised, following the worst ever wildfire in the UK in June in Scotland, southern Scotland, that actually if it makes the application of Muirburn licenses any more stringent than it was before, and people decide that they won't bother, that means the equipment and the skills would not be there to be able to give the local response. And no amount of cutting equipment is going to do you any good when you're trying to deal with a wildfire. It might help, but it's not really what you need. It's not what the Fire and Rescue Service need. So Scotland recognised that, and it may well be that going on, we're able to tease apart. I mean, they're effectively operating under the same similar legislation, and yet coming to a very different conclusion. So I think that'll be there. And there's also, we need to do more work in terms of trying to unpick the fact that Natural England, in its review of the evidence, so Evidence Review 155, was able to downplay the role of the University of York's study. And there is strong evidence to indicate how they did it within the review, and they have not used the approach which they used looking at the University of York work on any other studies where questions were being asked. So, for example, the Ember study, which has been challenged in the academic literature, there's no reference to it at all. There's no reference to that challenge, so there's no effort to play down the findings from Ember. So anything which supported Natural England's previous view, the University of York, in the University of York study, Natural England played up and supported, and anything it didn't, they either played it down or stuck it in one of the annexes. So we've got good evidence for that now. So we might have to take...
That's very helpful in setting out what the sort of short-term situation might be. We might get an extension to the implementation date. We might get the whole thing turned over and withdrawn. But assuming none of that is successful, we're faced with relying on a future government to turn it over. And that was really what my question was about, because we're at a situation now where we can record information.
Yes,
and in
point.
a year or two's time, you know, people have done an awful lot of cutting on 30-centimetre peat. We might not necessarily be able to record what was there before we cut it, and to be able to compare. That's what I'm trying to sort of hint at, is whether or not we need to be putting some provision, you know, some collecting some data in readiness for a battle in the medium term.
That's a good point, George. I might speak to Steve Gibson about that. I think that we can do, in particular, we'd be able to do the fuel loading. We'd be able to do that remotely from satellites. We're currently, he's looking at that for the Peak District. They are rewriting the Peak District wildfire risk assessment. So I think I saw Anthony Barber-Lomax on the call earlier. So that are going to revisit that. And one of the things that Steve Gibson and his team are going to do is to go and look at how much the fuel load has increased since they did their first survey. And they are also going to do, because you can do it remotely by satellite, they are also going to go and have a look at RSPB dovestones, because Natural England are saying that is an example of a landscape which has become fire resilient as a result of re-wetting. Steve Gibson chuckled and said, well, I'll soon be able to tell you whether it is. So I don't know. They will look at it too and see, is it likely that that is actually a resilient landscape or not? So that's a good point, George. Let me give that some thought. Edmund, you had another thought? Edmund, have you got your hand up, or is that a legacy hand from earlier? There's a question from Matthew.
Yeah, sorry. No, yeah. I do beg your pardon. Edmund Glaister from Hersentunnel. First and foremost, thank you very much, Andrew, and Moorland Association for picking up our case. We've got lots of more than 40 centimetre peat, let alone 30 centimetre, and we have got a license which took a long time to apply for, which we can't act upon because we don't have the management plan. So we sort of tick a lot of boxes in terms of the unreasonableness of this even more stringent dictum. I love your expression of fettered mind. It is very clear that their mind was made up when they went into this, and it is completely unreasonable in my view, just having heard this for the first time, that, you know, if they're going to start the process, open the website for you to be able to apply on the 30th of September when the burning season starts, and then it'll take 3 months for you to be issued, and then it's going to take another 3 months for Natural England to give you an SSSI, which we are, permit. That takes us through to next March when the burning season finishes.
Yeah.
What good is your license? I mean, it's just like an impossible route.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for taking it up and fighting it with. I believe that you know your solicitors and barristers are all on it, and good luck. That's all I could say.
But thank you. So just for clarity for people, so in order to try and unlock this particular situation, we sent a legal letter to, well, I haven't, Bradners have, to Natural England, asking if we can all have a meeting on the moor to bottom out what is the standard that you actually require. They will say they want, the moon on a stick, and the law actually enables them to be able to say that. I think, generally speaking, they can pretty much say whatever they want as an arm's length body is what they want, but then point out how much that will really cost to do, once we've got an estimate on that, and then say, I'll look them in the eye and say, do you think it is fair, reasonable and proportionate that is what you are asking, which will effectively mean that all members will need to do it, and presumably you're expecting people applying on the 30 centimetre rule to also apply that, or are you not? Because if you are, you're effectively applying you're using the regulatory mechanism and you're abusing it because it's a financial penalty. So, and it's disproportionate regulation. But it's probably better to do it in person because it's harder for people to, at the moment, you can just keep passing letters backwards and forwards and they can keep saying, well, we're right. Well, they are maybe right in law, but in practical sense, I'm not sure that they are. And that's really what they want. I think we should not underestimate the importance of the role the Fire and Rescue Service are going to have to start playing. I think whilst under the 2021 regs, it influenced, it was a concern to us and it influenced a large area of moorland, but now effectively this has been implemented across a vast area of moorland. Now the Fire and Rescue Service has got a problem. And so effectively they have Natural England and DEFRA have compounded that problem. And I think it won't be long before the Fire and Rescue Service can no longer be silent. It's going to have to start speaking up. We have a copy of the National Fire Chiefs Council's submission to DEFRA, and it doesn't hold back. And I'm amazed that DEFRA felt able, and we don't understand how, able to not accommodate their concerns, or perhaps they feel that they have. And likewise, the Ideal Fire Project, which is a whole series of universities under a NERC funded project, which the MA sits on as well in terms of on the practitioner panel. They were commissioned a few years ago to answer many of these questions which DEFRA have now adjudicated on, and yet that work has not been published. And in their submission, which we now have a copy of because they've shared it with us, they advanced the argument that they were making a decision a year too early because the government had commissioned this work and it will be available next year. And so again, that indicates an abuse of process. They were trying to get this out as quickly as possible before anybody starts realizing that perhaps there may be another side to this story. I don't know, I'm just speculating. But the longer the University of York study keeps going and it keeps saying things which don't agree with Natural England's position, and with this other work which is coming out from a collection of universities, they're going to struggle. And we're talking about in UK wildfire, so probably best not to ignore them. So I think that all of this is still to play out, and that's why we've got to do the practical thing on the ground. We've got to look at the legal option, and we've got to concentrate on the media activity. And wrapping around all of that is making sure we continue to engage with MPs. Some members have done amazing work, and it is astonishing how engaged some of the new Labour MPs are in what issues are happening on their moors. And so we're trying to pull some of those together at Westminster to actually discuss this, because they are genuinely interested in it. And we must remember, while we see government departments being hugely frustrating, we think it's just us. It doesn't matter whether you're dealing with education or health or any other issue. These interdepartmental failure to communicate with each other is normal. And so for an MP, they're perfectly used to being presented with this idea that different departments aren't speaking to each other, and there needs to be some joint meetings. So it may be that some of that. So I couldn't be certain which element of all of that will apply the pressure, and we may never know the answer. But ultimately, we've all got to keep pushing. But equally, we've also got to get these applications in to be able to if you like, ground truth it. Just a couple of other questions. One is the thoughts on what might constitute a measure to reduce burning in the future. That is a question which we'd like to have with Natural England at Hurst and Tunel in a site meeting with them, because how can we be certain of that? And also, is this not a trap? Because, and it may be possible at Hurst and Tunel, I don't know, but there are bound to be places where it is not possible, or you can't be certain of it. But what they want to do, I think, is to be able to say, you said last time that you were going to burn less, therefore you can't reapply now because what you said last time didn't work. So you can't burn. We're not going to issue another license, a subsequent license. I don't know. We need to be careful, because it if it is DEFRA's policy that burning is harmful, it is not unreasonable for Natural England to insist that. So you've got one mechanism feeding the other. And that's why we need to bring these other elements into play. There's an important part in the 2025 regs, which I didn't dwell on because we need to bottom it out with DEFRA. But they have, for the first time, and we've not seen it before, they have, there's a clause in there which says that DEFRA may overrule the environmental factors, and this is under the SSSI element. They may overrule that if it is in the government's interest to do so. So let's play that forward a bit. It may well be that the culmination of Andreas Heinemeyer's work at the University of York and some others, actually it may be that if we can demonstrate that burning locks up more carbon than other methods, carbon is a higher, an adaptation to climate, carbon is a higher priority than the condition of the SSSI units at local level. So, and we also understand, but we need to check it, in Canada, they are now making payments to landowners to burn, to create biochar to lock up carbon. So there must be good evidence for that, because you don't spend public money on things unless there's a good reason. So if we can start layering it up, and the other obvious example would be on the North York Moors, it would make sense that Fylingdales has a fairly comprehensive ring of management all the way around it. I mean, there is an asset of not just national but international importance. It's the only listening post the Americans have got in the world, which scans through 360 degrees for enemy threats. It's probably quite a good idea that it doesn't burn down. So on that basis, you know, we need to be able to protect infrastructure. So we may, in this group, and I'd be interested to know when people wanted to meet again, but actually start exploring other things, because actually it may be that we should also be putting in applications to be able to protect assets. There may be roads, infrastructure, pylons, could be anything. If there's a reason to protect it, then it needs protecting, and that may give DEFRA an opportunity to be able to consent to a burn, despite the fact that Natural England has said no, and said no on a SSSI. You can't. And DEFRA would then have the authority. Now, I don't know whether DEFRA, we don't know why yet DEFRA have inserted that clause. We suspect that it must be a very senior civil servant that did that, because no one in the peatland protection team has ever mentioned or agreed to anything like this before. It may well be as a result of the HS2 Bat Tunnel fiasco that they have pulled that across on all of Natural England's decision making, that it now enables the government to make a decision in the government interest rather than an individual SSSI unit interest level. And or it could have been the fact that the government throughout this summer, due to the wildfires, you know, it was constantly having to deal with press inquiries saying, why are you trying to make the wildfire situation worse? And actually, so it may be that DEFRA have got a bit bored of being made to look foolish and realise they need to have a mechanism to allow us and others to be able to burn. And Darren, you're right about the you know, the public perception. I mean, that every nation, we got to remember, every nation has been through this painful curve of burning's a bad thing. Oh no, burning's now a good thing. And that happens happened in North America, it's happened across Europe, in Southern Europe, and it's just a matter of time before that comes back. It's hugely helpful from a legal perspective that the nation has signed the G7 agreement on wildfire, which includes the use of prescribed burning as a tool, and it stands to reason that eventually the pendulum will swing back the other way. We'll just have to hope we've still got the kit and the assets and the knowledge to be able to do it effectively. I'm conscious of time, and we made it to 7 o'clock, and you've all been very patient. Are there any other points or questions that anybody wants to raise? By all means, go through, Bernie, if there are particular points or other detailed questions that you wanted to raise. And or my other question would be either now or let us know when you'd like to run through this again. We could either do this every week, do it every fortnight, every month, or we could do it on an ad hoc basis. It's up to you, but perhaps you might let us know your thoughts either now or by email. Certainly, if we get as far as some sort of legal challenge, it might well be that you want to be updated on that, so at least you're briefed on it, because we'll also need to make sure that everybody at local level is able to articulate what is going on to not only to your own constituency MPs, but also to local councillors and others. But Rob, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's 2 weeks today that the templates and the online application form are due to go live, so it might make sense to do something sort of in a couple of weeks' time.
Okay, thank you. Well, we'll see whether they get switched on. Certainly after the meeting on the 25th, we can either do updates by email and or talk these things through. But certainly the coverage, George, and Ollie, I think in the Yorkshire Post this weekend won't have made comfortable reading for DEFRA at all. And I think that even Natural England must be wincing a bit, thinking, oh, we got this coming. Natural England's legal team have put in writing that they do not advise the government on wildfire. It's helpful to have that in writing. So if anybody hears and they are not, it is not one of their duties to advise on wildfire. Obviously, they advise on protecting their own assets. So they are in quite an interesting place where they have admitted that they don't advise on wildfire. They don't employ any wildfire experts, nor could they, because they have no remit to. So there's another challenge that they've got on their hands. They have a member of staff which they've designated as their lead on wildfire, but on doing some further investigations, we established that individual is currently training to be a lead on wildfire. There's not actually someone that can attend a meeting like this and actually explain their position. So there we go. Any other thoughts? We're 5 minutes over, but any other thoughts or questions before we close? Because hearing none, thank you very much indeed for your time and attention, and let's see how much further we can get.